Hello and welcome once again to INSEAD's Leadercast series. My name is Charles Galenick, the Dean of the Executive MBA. We are very fortunate to have with us today Jean-Louis Constanza. Jean-Louis is the CEO of Orange Vallee, a very interesting incubator business model, part of the Orange Group that he started up in 2007. Jean-Louis is also a graduate of INSEAD. He is an MBA from 1989. He will be interviewed today by Professor Gareth Dias from our strategy area.
Hello, Jean-Louis.
Hi, Gareth.
I'll pass very quickly over your career. You had a very interesting one because I think you left INSEAD to go into actually industry, high-tech industry, but real industry. Then you had a period as a consultant, which I don't think is your natural talent, but you managed to get to know a lot of people doing the consulting and I guess continued to learn things. No. Since then, you've actually really had a very major role, basically building across Europe Tele2, which is actually quite a major player in the telecoms industry. And I think that's when I read about you in the newspapers quite a lot. Then a sort of new venture that you started and got a lot of money, and I'm not sure that you made as much as you wanted to. And now you have what I think is a rather interesting but strange job. And I'd like to start by just asking you how on earth someone with an entrepreneurial bent like yourself could possibly have joined a company like Orange, which I see as a very large and somewhat bureaucratic organization. And you're not a bureaucrat at all, so give me a little bit of an explanation as to how you got into that.
It relates back to 1 year ago when the chairman of Orange wanted to set up an organization that is exactly similar to a skunk works, for those who know the model, and which the principle of which was to decide that a lot of projects in the moving environment of telecoms and the internet can't be run into the mainstream of a large organization like Orange. So my chairman, Mr. Lombard, said we got to put those projects into something new that is as much as possible going to have the best of both worlds. The strengths of Orange and the creativity and the rapidness or the flexibility of a startup organization. We both recognize that most of the time those ventures take the worst of both worlds, become very fast bureaucratic and are not creative at all. So we are trying our best with the rest of Orange to give that new venture, whose name is Orange Vallee, enough freedom vis-à-vis the rest of the organization, enough power to push strong projects on the web, particularly on the web, not only on the web, to enrich Orange's business. And that's really tricky. As you said, it's very hard not to be swallowed by bureaucracy, but it's also quite thrilling to have the power of a large company and try and compete with Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, and the others. So when it came to say yes or no, I didn't see how to say no, because that's an offer that you can't really refuse, even though I knew the risks. But after 6-7 months of running that organization, for the moment it looks good. We are going to put the first projects on the market. I think it has remained startup-like, and it hasn't cost too much money to the group right now. It is still having a lot of degrees of freedom, and hopefully it will contribute to Orange business in the years to come.
When you started, did this have to be all built from scratch, or did you inherit pieces that Orange had in other places?
My boss was wise enough to let me free. So if there are projects that everyone agrees that I can get from Orange and inject into the new organization, that's okay. If I want to run projects from scratch, that's okay too. So it was very pragmatic. I ran into the organization, saw what pieces of technology, and there are a lot, and pieces of projects, and there were some, could be taken over by Orange Vallee. And we also decided to launch projects from scratch based on what we have in terms of strength. As a group, we have a lot of strengths, we have a lot of technology, we have a lot of customers. That's one way of seeing it. Also, there are trends in the market, so it's our job to analyze them and transform them into projects in terms of months and not years. Years is the telco's world. and month is the internet world. So we're quite free. We only have goals in terms of how many customers will we have, be it members, if we develop social networks, being audience viewers, if it's new TV or radio or music, be it subscribers, because some services we're developing actually require money from our customers. And there we have quite an ambitious target. We must develop millions of customers.
So, I mean, it is in a sense a kind of a startup. I mean, it's like a new venture, except you have a venture capitalist who's slightly different in motivation.
It's physically a startup company. Right. We have a different location. We can hire people. We're based on business models, and we have a very strong venture capitalist. But it's not completely a startup. We also have an industry behind us. So there are two consequences, at least. One is that we're encouraged, not by anyone, but by ourselves, to leverage value of the group. We are not going to launch projects that have strictly no synergy with the group, even in the future. And the second one is that we are evaluated by people. Even though I respond and I report to Mr. Lombard, the chairman, I have a lot of sponsors, gurus, managers of France Telecom, Orange, that are circling around the company and helping me, and they have an industrial view, not only a financial view, which is a different turn in mine.
Where does the concept of this come from? Is this out of a discussion between you and Mr. Lombard that this is something worth doing, or did they sort of headhunt you to do this? I mean, is to what extent is the idea partly yours, or the idea is Monsieur Lombard's? I'm interested because people always talk about leaders having vision. I'm interested in whose vision always. To
tell you the truth, it came pretty much well armed from the brains of Mr. Lombard. In one conversation, he drafted the constraints and the possibilities of the organization. And we didn't have to make it change too much. Where I fit into that vision right away was because of my past experience. Partly not in telecoms and the internet, but before going to INSEAD, I was believe it or not, a missile manufacturer with a French company. And being in the aeronautics, I wondered why some aeronautical companies had external, semi-external development organizations that were so performing. And specifically, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Skunk Works from Lockheed Martin. So he came up with the vision that was exactly that of the Skunk Works, which is now an exemplified management model. And I liked it, so we didn't have to talk too much, and we just implemented it nearly as it came out, and it was quite efficient. At least at the moment, it works well. So what it says is, basically, we don't have grids and rules for choosing which projects go there and which projects remain in the mainstream. It's done by discussion. So people meet. Managers of Orange and myself, we discuss and decide by talking. There is no process to do that.
Are you free to do projects which at first sight may not have an obvious relationship to Orange, or is there always a sort of test of, does this make long-run strategic sense for Orange and its telco business, which is their basic business, or is it pretty experimental? I mean, I know you're a believer in Darwin, so how Darwinian are you allowed to be?
Very few people, if any, know what the strategic orientation of Orange or the telecoms industry or the internet industry is going to be in the 2, 3, 4 years to come. So part of my job is to make sure that we don't hide ourselves behind our finger. Is that, no, that's French. That we don't hide the truth, and that we are able to recognize that we have to cope with a very blurred environment. And sometimes we have to find a way between the strong belief in one project, which is not enough, and a strategic analysis that would say that in 4 years this project is going to be synergical with our mobile offer, which is impossible. So we have ways to do that, we're developing them, but most of it has to bank upon a group of people, so typically management of Orange and management of my little operation, to make decisions that are based on the medium term, I would say. It's not always short. You launch on the short term, but you target the medium term, and you hope to be okay on the long term. But you can't plan the long term any longer in these industries. So it would be excuses to give to ourselves to have strategic views on 5 years. It would be only a way to reassure a committee that would have a magic wand to decide on projects. That doesn't work. We try to be on target on the medium term, and then we will see. It's very pragmatic.
I would imagine that working in your unit, not just for you, but for the people who work with you, is very different from working with Inside Orange. And my question is, have you had to go and get people from outside the organization, or have you managed to attract people to your unit from inside Orange? And what are there any issues there?
The answer is both. You know, there are 200,000 persons at Orange. So statistically, you have everything. So probably you have people that fit well within that venture and that would accept the rules, like there is no organization chart, like everything's project oriented, so there is no career, and like you should help each other, which are some of the rules I'm trying to implement. Not write them, never put that in writing. When you start writing down the rules, it means that they're dead.
You write the rules when you feel the culture is not working, right?
It's dead, you know, you write Latin, but when the culture is live, you have to make them feel alive.
What about this other thing that you've talked about? Because I have a little bit of experience with new ventures attached to big companies for the purpose of innovation. And one of the controversies is the moment the thing starts to get, it's all fine when it's small, and the new venture doesn't look like it's going to be millions and millions or billions of dollars, but the moment it looks like it's going to be actually quite big, the organization tries to get it back. I mean, they don't want to leave it separate. They try to, like when they acquire a foreign company, they want to push it into their system. And I'm just wondering, it's a bit maybe soon for you to have dealt with that issue, but have you got conventions that says how long you can keep it?
No.
Once it's successful, how long you can keep it in your organization, and when it goes back to?
It's going to be a rich man's problem, but if you know, I always say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it ain't broke at the moment.
So it's okay. Huh?
It's okay. Part of the mission is whenever a product or a service becomes mainstream, it has to go back to the mainstream, which is perfectly armed to organize it and sell it to hundreds of millions. Fine. So that's fine. That's fine with me, and that's fine with the company. It's even part of my job. If you take the Skunk Works metaphor, they're building aircraft, and they have always built new aircraft throughout the Second World War with huge success, and sometimes, if for the aircraft fans around, the F-104, for instance, they developed it, they produced the first 100, and then they sold, I think it's 5,000 copies, so they had to industrialize it somewhere else.
And it went elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's right.
But in order to know whether it's possible or desirable to put it back into mainstream, you have at least to run the service 1-2 years, and probably to handle millions of clients. So we are an industrial company, not only an incubator of new ideas.
And what could induce you to throw in the towel and say, this is not what I was supposed to be doing? Is there anything you can?
Asking the question to myself every morning. At the moment, really, it's too early to say, because we've been actually working at projects for 6 months. Projects have been helped by the group, none has been slowed. We see a lot of synergies. I can quote quite a lot. So it's really going well. It's going well because there is top management involvement. It's written in your books. Nothing works if the top manager is not involved. It's also been working well because the group knows that, well, in our strategy, we have to get some control into the other layers of the added value chain. And in order to do that, you can't do it from the place where the current value chain is nurtured. We know that we have, so the group agrees. And I'm not the only initiative in the group, you know, we do a lot, it's a big group. So that is doing very well. I'm not frustrated actually today, which is quite cool.
What's interesting to me is that you're trying to build a culture from scratch, if you like.
Not from scratch, because Orange, like a lot of telcos, but not all of them, has some cultural traits that you can bank upon.
So
telcos have
borrowed from Orange.
Yeah, well, I have to borrow them from somewhere, and it has to be Orange because that's my mother company, and we want to build synergies. So, what is a telco? A telco is a former monopoly from usually state-owned, but most of them have kept, not all, but most of them have kept, for instance, a relationship to customers that is beyond what you have usually. They will never trick customers. They may cut some corners, but at the end of the day, the decision is to be honest. The love of customer is really a very strong asset to bank upon. That's one. There are others. They're quite straightforward. You know, they're engineers. So once you explain that this is a blur world, okay, they say, okay, it's blur. So let's adapt to a blur world, and they will be straightforward about what they do. They are not twisted personalities usually in telcos. So there are cultural traits that are not only business oriented but really cultural. You have to belong. So we definitely belong in the Orange world. I try to have my guys and girls never say Orange and us. We are Orange. We are a different Orange.
I've heard you say us, talking about the whole of Orange, which I found interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
Us is Orange. It's not just your little group.
Absolutely. Which is bizarre for me because I've fought against Orange at a small scale, but for like 10 years. But I also couldn't have done that job if I didn't have for long years a great respect for that company. When I was consultant for Orange, and then I started to appreciate it. There are many companies I wouldn't work for. And this one I'm quite happy to work with.
You have a career where you've been lucky because you've been autonomous and managed a lot of things. You know, you haven't worked inside large organizations and slowly moved your way up. You've actually each time had some sort of venture where you were fundamentally very often in charge of it. What's the next step?
I know what I won't do. I'm not able to manage a large part of a company like Orange. Notwithstanding Orange itself. That it's not only that I don't have the taste for it, maybe I would, but I can't do that. I don't have, there are things that I miss in my, so I would do it, but mediocrely. Then I can always try and start up a new company, but you got to have ideas for that and convictions. So if you value companies by cash flows and revenues, then whatever I do, even if I redo Yahoo.com, they make $500 million revenue per year. That's 1% of Orange's revenue. And that would be a huge success. So what's the goal? The goal is not only to do projects, it's probably to, one, do projects that have a strong leverage with telcos. And in that leverage, you can build a lot of value. And what's funny is that you don't see how. So either it will fail, we won't find leverage, or we'll find some leverage inventing new businesses. Those businesses with strong leverages between internet and telcos don't exist today. Just give you one example. Telcos own all data about everyone's communications. In my systems, I know how many times you called, whom you called, what internet access did you have, what internet services you used, what mails did you send, etc., more or less. And if I don't know them, my friend or competitor knows it. Now,
That's a very frightening thought, by the way. But
it's been around for 40 years. So,
no, I know it's true. That's all right. Don't worry.
We don't look at it. I, as a telco, can offer you the huge service to re-access it. You own this data. That's only one example where we could find huge synergies between web and telcos. And if we find that, that's going to be a lot of fun because we're inventing something really new with a potential huge value. So that's step number 2. And step number 3 could be that, as I said, there are more or less $10 billion flowing in from Asia and 10 other flowing in from Europe to the US because of IT every year. And that's growing 30% per year. So that can't possibly last for long because 30% per year over 10 years, you don't need an MBA to know that it's a lot of increase. So if you build a scenario where Europe or Asia or both are strong on IT tomorrow, let's say in 5 or 10 years, then if you retro-paddle from that scenario, you have to build something. Not copying the Silicon Valley, which is probably stupid, but something new. Who can do that? Orange, Vodafone, NTT Docomo? New players? Who? I don't see. I don't see who. And then that's also a cool challenge. Building something that should normally be built organically. But, you know, around the MIT, around Stanford, it has not been only built by chance. Some people planned some parts of it. There were even sometimes state investment. That was the case in Massachusetts, for instance. So you can trigger the coalescence or coagulation of forces around a location, a project, etc. And only a few companies can do it. So if we could survive and thrive and to that point, then I'd be happy to sign it for next 10 more years, you know.
Your mission is to save Orange, basically, from some of the risks they face. I mean, the fixed line business, I mean, telecoms are at a fantastic juncture in their history. You're not quite sure who's going to survive, who's going to win. And my guess is that the government of France even is not interested in you, but is interested in the success of your project, because they're interested in telecoms. I mean, does that make you feel good or bad?
My mission is not to save Orange or the French government. I have no such strong mission. But in order to have the good people in my team, at least I have to have some, you know, vision point or dream. Sometimes I don't write a strategic plan, but we have beer together and we say, okay, it's not only about this project. We must succeed in this project. We have a business case. It's not funky. We have business cases, we have deadlines, we have resources that are limited, very scarce actually, because if you pour in resources in such an organization, you kill it. It's like pouring over too much water on some flowers. You would kill it. You know, cooperation doesn't work in abundance, I find. So it's scarce, it's not funky, then people also need to have embrace some sort of a vision. You don't make them responsible for building the new France, you know, but you say, okay, you succeed in that project, we'll make another project, but then we have an idea about what's going to happen if we succeed. And that's what all organizations should do with their people anyway. You know, it's do that, do this, and then maybe go a little beyond. And that's what we're doing. So it's nothing like saving Orange.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us, and hopefully in another 10 years you'll come back and tell us the story of this fairly new venture within a very large and very rich and still quite successful large company.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks a lot.